Okay. So welcome. Thank you everybody for joining us. We may have more people joining us throughout this session. And just to introduce myself, my name is Yair, and I live here in Lower Merion in Marion Park. And my kid goes to Kinwood, and the second kid was also going to go to Kinwood Elementary next year. So before we do introductions to Beth, I wanted to introduce Cora. So Cora, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe thoughts that you have about this whole wait until 8th and smartphones, etc.
Hi there. My name is Cora Pluta. I have three kids. The oldest is in third grade, the next one's in first grade, and then the youngest will be starting kindergarten in the fall. We're at Wayne Elementary School in Radnor Township School District, and we live in Wayne. Um, this is such a huge topic, and I'm so excited to have Dr. Beth talk to us all about her experiences and her expertise in this area. I personally feel pretty okay with how my children are currently using technology, but I am concerned about how I am modeling my own smartphone use for them. And I also worry about how things may evolve as they get bigger, and I may feel that there's more need for them to have a phone of their own to text with. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
So thank you, Cora. I'm going to introduce Beth in a second, but just to say that just a little bit about what is happening here. So this is a first Zoom webinar out of a webinar series that we're going to have about technology and smartphones, social media, and children. And really, this is not like any organization or anything. Just a lot of parents from the district, from Lower Merion, from Radnor, etc., got together we reached out to each other because we know that we're interested in personally in delaying smartphones to a later age, kind of like wait until 8th. And there's different other initiatives, but basically to delay smartphones. And I think that this is something that many people, feel strongly about. And the only introduction that I'm going to say, and I said this before, it's really important. Probably the most important aspect for us is this is not a cult. We're not a cult against technology. We love technology. I work in technology, and it's incorporating it every moment of my day pretty much. And so it's not something about technology, it's just about when to give our children this type of technology. And probably the most important aspect, and we always talk about it, it's also not about judgment, because we have to be very careful. It's not that we're saying that those families who give their fifth grade kid a smartphone is doing something bad. For us, it doesn't, we think that we should delay a little bit longer. Every family is different, every child is different, and we just have to, we have to accept each other's choices and not to judge each other. So that's just a little introduction. And we're doing a lot of different stuff in terms of how, in school and HSAs and, with the board and many, many initiatives in terms of spreading the word and talking openly about, oh, there's another Beth. Beth, there's a duplicate of yours. So anyway, this is kind of like the introduction that I wanted to give about what we're doing. And I'm really happy to introduce Beth, or Dr. Rosenwasser, who, first of all, she's a neighbor and we know each other from the neighborhood. She's a child and family behavior consultant with Advocare, Fairmount Pediatrics, and Adolescent medicine. Dr. Beth is a licensed clinician and board certified behaviorist. In addition to her science orientation, she integrates poetry, art, nature, and mindfulness into her practice. She also grew up in this area in Lower Merion with limited TV time, and she has lived experience as a mother of 23 years old twins who basically have recently launched into adult lives. I actually know one of these twins, Sam, and he's doing a lot of research now and working with me a little bit, kind of tasting a little bit of medicine. So Dr. Beth, or Beth, I think my first question to you, to just launch the conversation, is basically maybe tell us about your story. You just told before we started the recording, you were saying that you personally delayed the smartphones for your twins until 9th grade or so. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what made you decide this and how did you actually implement it? And just before you go, for those people who joined, we can't see you, but you can see us. And please feel free to drop all your questions or comments down below, there's a section of Q&A. So, and Cora and myself will moderate and we'll review and, you know, try to bring up all your questions. So thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Yair and Cora. My son Sam was trying to get in, but I could only send him the link you sent me. That's why he popped up as Beth. So you would need to send him something else unless he's going to be on the panel. So, yeah, I'm a person that grew up in a family that was pretty, we could watch, like I was one of 3 girls and we had to fight over who got to pick the TV show for that week. So I grew up in a home that was pretty adamant that TV wasn't healthy and that we didn't need to have it as much as our neighbors. And it didn't mean that I didn't get plenty because I just went down the street and slept over my friend's house on a regular basis in elementary school and watched Saturday morning TV with her. But it did communicate to me that it was, I guess, that it was okay to be a little bit different and that every house can have their own house rules. And so when my kids were little, I'm not anti-technology, I'll say. Like they had these cute little iMacs when they were like 1 year old, and they put puzzle pieces together and they had kind of educational games on them. But I had limits. They weren't available all day long in their playroom. So I'm definitely not anti-technology. And by the time they were in middle school, they both had computers. They were using computers in school. They had flip phones, which could only text or call, and that's it. There were no games on them, nothing else. Because I felt like it was important for them to be able to communicate with me. They were independent enough walking to school and back. They were walkers to school. But I saw just for myself how addictive cell phones are, smartphones. They're kind of, I used to run addiction treatment programs for mostly drugs and alcohol. And I saw, it's not just children, like all of us adults, I'm sure we're familiar with that, like our kids saying like, or our partner saying like, hey, I'm talking to you. And it's just so, in addiction, we talk about the addictive substance or whatever it is being an all-purpose coping mechanism. And because phones have so many functions, they just can, you can listen to your music on them. You can talk to a friend. You can see how many people respond to your like new posting. You can look for work through it. You can, network for all different kinds of things. You can watch movies on it. It serves so many functions. It's distraction. It can get you out of your head. You can use it when you're bored. You can use music or podcasts to go to sleep to. So it just serves so many functions. And I saw what it did to me and other people I knew, my patients. And I just felt like I didn't want my kids to have that kind of powerful addictive tool in their hands so young. So that's why I decided not to get them a smartphone until they were entering 9th grade, which in our district is the beginning of high school. Some schools parse out middle school and high school differently, but for us, it was them starting a new school, which they went to Harriton High School in Rosemont. So they of course whined and said, oh my God, we are the last people to get a cell phone, Mom, and they actually were. So, I mean, lots of kids say that, but in this case, it was actually true. But I also noticed I was a single working mom. So in the evenings, I worked a lot and other people did the carpools for me. And parents would always comment to me how conversant my kids were because they didn't have a cell phone to look at. And all the other kids in the minivan were looking at their phones. So that made me feel good. And both of them are very conversant, adults. And I like that they're comfortable and that they can find something to say. So the last thing I'll say is just that when I asked my son, who isn't going to join us tonight, Ben, when I asked him how he felt about it looking back, he said, I hated it. I really hated it. We were the last people to get them. It was a little embarrassing. Like with his good friends, he wasn't embarrassed. He just didn't like it. But with people that he didn't know, he felt you know, a little one down. So it's good he had a friend group. And he said, but now, like, I totally agree with it. You know, he sees how it is, and um, he works to, like, you know, take breaks from his phone and thinks about how he uses it. So he feels like it's a good idea. And he thought the wait until 8th was kind of a cool idea. He hadn't heard of it. And he said, like, it would make it easier for him because there would be like a cohort of kids that also were more like him. And I sort of feel like that would have been nice as a parent too. You know, as a clinician, I felt comfortable, more comfortable because I had colleagues. But I think it's hard, you know, to get nagged by parents and kids alike. So when you make decisions that are, you know, different than most of your peers.
Let me ask you, Beth, a question. And actually, we're going to hear, we have a special guest today who is your son, and he's going to join us as a panelist in a few minutes. But I wanted to ask you a question. So you were the last, basically the last parent to allow in 8th grade or 9th grade. Everybody else had smartphones. What made you, I mean, you explained a little bit, but is it because of your professional, part of your professional career? Because you work with parents and children, that's kind of your job. Helping with behavioral issues of children. Is that, or has that influenced your decision to delay the smartphones until later on in life?
I think it's some of what I already spoke about. But, you know, there's a lot of arguing. There's a lot of boundaries that you need to set with kids about all kinds of things. You know, but for example, they had computers and they had games on them. And there was one game, something like a wizard, something wizard. It's not popular anymore, but it was. And it was purposely done. Even my babysitters complained about it because it took so long to get to the next level. And the way they set it up is if you didn't get to the next level before you quit, you went back down to the level that you started at that day. And so they really had a very strong, from a behavioral principle, extinction if you tried to make them stop, like because it's dinner or because it was a certain amount of time. And I do believe it's really kind of unkind to kids to say like it's 30 minutes and then they've watched a 20-minute show and you're trying to stop them in 10 minutes into the next show. So I think it's really good to be sensitive to like the ends of things in addition to time. But with this, there was such a long span before you achieved the goal, so you didn't get sent back to start, that it just created so much arguing. And I could see how that same kind of thing could happen with the multiple functions that come with a smartphone. And the solution with that was to help them find other games that they liked. And thankfully Minecraft was around and that didn't have that kind of really punishing contingency for stopping at a certain time that was reasonable. But I know also not just from me, but from a lot of my referrals are for kids having some kind of big emotions or temper tantrums, and screens are a big source of it. So I think the portability of a smartphone makes it different than like a desktop or a laptop. I have a locked closet after trying to hide their tablets from them around the house and then forgetting where I hid them and everyone getting frustrated, including me. I put a lock on a closet, and you know, if they went through a phase where they were trying to sneak, you know, getting on the Wii or sneak getting on the computer after the time, I knew how to block the Wi-Fi after a certain time. I had parental controls. Some of them don't work, but this was just the whole login was theirs. Was mine for the main person, and then they were guests. So I could control the on and off of the computer. I could also just take the keyboard or the Wii wands and throw them in the closet and lock the closet, and that was the end of it. I think those kind of boundaries, when it's a hard no, are really useful. Because then you don't have arguing. When you have a very consistent boundary, then you don't get a lot of pushback. If you intermittently say yes when you get like nagging, if it's a no, 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 and then you get tired and you're worn down and you say yes, that the next time they're gonna know to nag that long or a little bit longer to get the same thing. So I just felt like it was going to be very hard to get the phone away from them. So I wanted them to be at a certain age where I could expect them to have a reasonable conversation with me and some reasonable boundaries. And I think they did. But I'll leave it up to Sam. That's my son, Sam Weissman, and he can let you know how he felt about it. I'm curious too.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for joining us.
You're on mute, babe.
Oh, I am again.
No, you're not, babe.
Hey.
No, you're not the babe. Sam. Go ahead, Sammy.
I'm happy to be called babe though. Sam, we heard all about from your mom how she was thinking as she was making decisions about when you might be given different pieces of technology. But how was it for you? What did you think about that? And what kind of decisions do you think that you might make if you had children?
So for me, it was a long time ago, and I can't say I have it wasn't something that I don't feel like it so impacted me, the pain of not having a phone, that I remember it vividly. Um, I I think that, yeah, to be honest, I remember like there was a period of a few years where I felt like I was one of the few people without a phone, but I also feel like I was never somebody who was too bothered by stuff like that. Like I I didn't learn to drive until pretty late also. And but I do think that it was really important that I delayed. Like I think I'm very happy in retrospect that I didn't, because I know that I can be very addicted to my phone after I got it, and it becomes a huge time drain. And I think it kind of reflects that now a lot of people in college and closer to my age now have all these apps you can get that actually you can download them and they lock your phone. Um, and I think very few people in middle school or elementary school are going to have kind of their own kind of motivations to get an app like that locks down their phone. But it speaks to the fact that a lot of people when they're older feel, when they're driven to accomplish certain things in their life, feel so hindered by the addiction of their phone that they'll voluntarily download something onto their phone that locks it for like 8 hours a day so they can't use it. So if people are choosing to voluntarily do that when they're in college, I think um, and I've used it. My brother uses it actually. Ben uses it. Um, I instead just delete apps that if I'm spending too much time on them. But there's such a like people around my age, including me, are on our phone for so much of our life that it's very easy to develop addictions to certain apps. And and so when you have your own motivations a little more, you can some people can develop ways to deal with that. But when you're like in middle school, elementary school, you don't have like some goal or other drives in your life that are so strong that are going to lead you to voluntarily lock down your phone all day. And so I think it's really, and those kinds of apps, you can get around them pretty easily. So it's not like they're things that a parent could really use to control their child's phone usage. So I think it just speaks to the fact that if you have a goal, the phone is such a hindrance to kind of normal doing well. I would say for social stuff, people can use their phone socially, but in terms of goals outside of that, it's it's a big time sink that's extremely hard to escape from. And I think it's a shame that like you see so many young people now who are always like I remember I went to my brother's karate class when I was a little older, and all the like 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds were all on Angry Birds, and like it's fine, it's fun for them, but I do worry that it's leading to a degrading of certain social interactions that are normal when you're younger, and limiting because it's just so in the moment addicting. It's limiting their ability to branch outside of that and develop interests outside of the phone.
I'm really interested to hear about your experience. So when your mom was talking about a lock closet that she had for your devices when you were growing up, it reminded me of a story that somebody told me about when she worked in a middle school, and some of the kids in her class or in the school were not allowed to have sugar at home. And so they had lockers at school that were full of Skittles. They called them the Skittles lockers. So I am thinking about technology and how all the kids can create Skittles lockers for themselves. For example, by having their social media accounts on somebody else's phone. I think that what you were saying about how we're also addicted is just so true. I completely feel it. And I think as parents, that's part of what's driving us right now, is realizing that our phones are standing between us and connecting with our little kids, because we're like answering a message instead of playing a game. But then going back to what your mom said, the phone has everything. If I want to take a picture of my child, there's my phone. If I want to call my mom and tell her a joke that my kid said, there's my phone. So I guess, Beth, if you can take it from here around your thoughts about the concept of a Skittles locker and how it could relate to technology use.
Yeah, I think there's two aspects of the Skittles locker. One is like if you don't allow something 100%, then people may crave it. A subset of children are going to crave it elsewhere and really seek it out heavily. You know, I locked it up when I was setting a boundary about it. It wasn't that they were never allowed to have it. And then at a certain, gradually they had more and more control and they had to make their own decisions about it. But that was more like around 16, 15, 16, you know, later high school years, when I wasn't going to monitor so heavily. But I hope that I had, you know, built enough of those other skills are in place, and some of the goals Sam talked about were counter motivators to it. I think kids are different. I think some kids need some more limits than others. So that's one aspect of, you know, I also don't keep much sugar in the house as a health thing, but like if we go out to dinner or, you know, we're walking by an ice cream store, like you know, it's a treat, but it's, you know, it's a fairly frequent treat. And every once in a while I buy something for the house or for dessert, you know, but it's, so I think that, you know, addictive things or things that aren't necessarily healthy in high doses, it's good to have them in small amounts, because I do think you can get that longing, or like everyone has it, but I don't, because they weren't technology free. A lot of my current clients, you know, it's a thing for young elementary school age kids, especially boys. And especially I work with a lot of kids in the city, where they come home from school and it's a thing where everyone gets on their tablet and they play a game together, and they have like a time where they log on. And I've even had teenagers who are like a little quirky, and that their friends, their parents would allow them to like finish their homework. And in high school, they could get on and game at like 10 o'clock at night from 10 to 11:30 or something. And so it wasn't like a lack of, they still had that screen for socialization, but they didn't have the access to like a million apps. It's kind of a different thing. So in terms of having accounts on other people's, you know, they're not, limitation isn't a panacea for the challenges of having relationships with your children as they grow. You know, my dad, who I had a great relationship with, he's passed now. But when I asked him about his best advice when the boys turned 13, he said, just keep the lines of communication open. So, you know, that was always, I'm not sure I was always perfect at it, but even now, you know, my goal is to is to act in a way where, I talk with my clients about the two aspects of parenting, the vitamin A or authority role and the vitamin C, which is like the caring role. And, there's a balance there. If you're too much of the authoritative role, you really harm your relationship with your children. On the other hand, if you're just like being their friend and you don't set limits, they can develop habits or not develop skills that they need to, and it's our job to guide them, at least in my view. So that balance is that relationship that you have with your kids. And I think what keeps kids from sneaking too much and having some guilt about going far beyond what you've set down as a verbal rule is your relationship with them, and the idea that they would be very disappointing. There's good data on drug addiction, drug use and alcohol use in high school that shows that if parents are negative about it and want kids to delay it, that it actually makes them drink less and less dangerously. So parental disapproval of something is meaningful. It doesn't mean they never sneak or never try, but that's different than kind of having a, free, thinking that it's a nothing because their parents, there's no stop in their mind from their parental, the input from their parents as compared to their peers or curiosity.
That's
So-
fascinating.
So I could go on, but why don't we see if there's other questions or?
I think that, one of the things that I wanted to ask you, Beth, is you're a professional because of your work. And I'll tell you, starting to work with John and Emil and Cora and David and everybody, it's just like in the last month or so. And that gave me so much awareness because I'm thinking now about smartphones and how damaging, and suddenly I'm much more aware of my own addiction to the point that I'm suddenly recognizing that if I'm, in the kitchen and we're dining and we're having dinner, and I even see my damn cell phone and it's sitting, I see it and it's like, I feel like it's calling, let me just go 1 second and check. Let me peek that nobody send me a message on WhatsApp or something on social media. And just quickly, it's really like attracting me. And, I'm an activist, so I'm involved in a lot of stuff and I feel the constant need to look at it. And I'm not only look at it, but also, if I'm posting an event like this one, how many people joined or how many people and who's commenting and what this and what that. And it's just like, and it makes me, if I see that people are not, joining enough, maybe it makes me feel guilty. If somebody is saying something that I perceive as not nice, I feel hurt. And all of that and the smartphones and the Facebook and scrolling when I'm, instead of just relaxing is, I'm realizing more and more that it takes a huge toll on me and other adults. So with that, the question to you, what have you noticed as a therapist dealing with children, parents and children in the last decade that was different than before? Because in the last decade, that's when we started having, in addition to computers, we actually have the smartphones and, TikTok, Snapchat, all these things. So what have you noticed in children or maybe even interaction with their parents?
Well, I think there's a lot of arguing about screens, basically. And I think that a lot of parents feel really disempowered to set limits. A lot of parents are working and they're pretty tired at the end of the day. The kids are coming home from, being on in a school environment and, it's a source. I'm not just talking about, it could be a phone, it could be a tablet, it could be, switch. It could be any kind of screen. And I think what's different is I feel like parents feel kind of defeated by it all. More than I've heard in the past. I even had a parent, in the fall that I was working with, and they had a teenager, but, middle schooler, but struggling. And they just, it was a fight between the parents about how much limits should be on the screen, but it was a real source of friction between the child and the parents. And one thing they said to me is, when I said that I waited and I didn't feel like it harmed my kids, that every house has their house rules, like bedtime or what time we get up or whether you take your shoes off when you come in the house. Like every house has house rules. And I always use that. I think that language is really helpful, because my kids would say like that their friends on their like Wii or their Nintendo, that they had some of the violent games and I wouldn't buy them. And I knew this is like the Skittle Slacker, my son Ben would come home. I'm sure Sam did it, but he knew enough not to say, Mom, I did it. But Ben would come home and say like, well, I played, which one was it it was horrible, the gun one that was really big. It's just like big blood and shooting with guns. He said, well, I just went and played that at Joey's house, and I was like, I didn't get overly, I was like, okay, well, you did it there. I wasn't so upset that he was exposed to it. I just said, like, that's not our house rules. That's not something I value, and we're not going to do it here. And when your friends come here, you're going to have to find something else to do here. So it wasn't like an all or nothing thing. Like I was trying to protect them from the whole world. Younger elementary school, some parents they had older siblings and they would watch kind of violent movies, and I didn't want them to see those. So I would just talk to the parent, but like past 4th grade or 3rd grade, that's, kind of intrusive to other people's houses. If your kid's going there, they're going to control their own house. So I think there's a lot of kind of decisions like that, but I think a lot of parents feel like they can't set limits in their own home and have their own house rules. And that's where I think that kind of movements like this and conversations can help empower parents that do feel like they want to figure out how to do it. The other thing I'll say is that there are functions on a phone that I think are useful for younger kids to have. One of them is like an MP3 player for music. Like some kids are anxious, or music calms them down either while they're doing homework, or it's a reward, like they can take breaks. If they're very stressed by some kind of homework, they can take breaks and have like a certain amount of time on a timer with like an MP3 player, and they're downloadable to have music they like. And there are ones that have screens, but there's actually one that's like a mini, and it's, I don't know, it's like $100 on Amazon, which is a lot, but it's very functional. There's also the libraries have like audio books that you just get the little thing and they plug their own earpods into them. And I think those things can be really good substitutes that have like some of the functions of a smartphone. So you can separate out the functions of a smartphone and allow the child to have some of those things in the house. So I think when I teach that to parents and I make them aware, and just so people know, on the Wait Until 8th website, there's a page that's really good that's has all the gadgets with links to them that are like alternatives to smartphones, but allow children some of the functions. And I know my partner's grandkids, they got gizmos, which are like little watches, but they only can text or call a limited number of people. And so they call him all the time. And if they called a peer that much, it would be totally inappropriate. But they're learning what's appropriate, and the grandparent gets to be involved. So there are ways of giving limited functions that are parts of smartphones to children so that they can experience parts of what phones are great for. There's also cameras, like you were saying, Cora, like there's cameras, and I can let my child, like if we're at a museum and they want to take some pictures of different art or something, we're on a trip, I can hand them my smartphone and let them take some pictures when they were younger. So it's not like I was afraid to hand them the phone to use it as a camera. If I thought they were going to run, if they were, my kids weren't, but like some kids, there's an oppositionality and they're going to run, 5 galleries down in the art museum and go on an app. Like that's a child that isn't ready for that right then. And so you don't give that child that, and you don't give the other kids in the house that either, because that's not fair. So there's a lot of individuality in households, but I think even for when kids are teenagers, learning to set uncomfortable limits and getting like comfortable with the limit that you're going to set, whether it's with a smartphone or something else, it's really important, because if you're not clear, that's where talking to other parents or a counselor or a coach, or going to, listening to some podcasts on parenting and getting clear what your parent values are, is how you're going to have the strength to calmly, set that limit consistently, because kids learn better if a limit is consistent. It's actually really hard for them to learn that no means no if every 8th time it means yes, because that's about the like a slot machine, that's the reinforcement value of a slot machine. So intermittent yeses when you really mean no really reinforces a lot of persistent nagging and sneaking. So picking the few things that you're going to have limits about and being very consistent is much better than having a wide range of no's and being inconsistent from a point of view of getting on the same page with your child and getting them to be, and we give in some, there's some things that my kids, you stretch to connect with your children too. Like there's things that my kids, like one of my kids liked heavy metal and I did not like heavy metal, but now I actually like it. But I listened to it because I wanted, one of my kids went through a teen phase where he was, had that angry or frustrated or whatever that energy is. And, he listened to it a lot, and he listened while he was doing homework, and it didn't seem to impede the homework. It actually seemed fine. And so that was one rule I had, that you had to have a quiet environment to do your work. Like that wasn't what he needed. And I saw that. I was willing to be open to see that. And I saw that. And then it was like loud, heavy metal. And so, when I learned to like heavy metal. So, and I could have just faked it to connect with him, which is fine. It's okay to try things to be close to your kids. But it's that balance of yeses and nos to connect that makes the nos okay and not harm your relationship.
You're saying so many things that are so relatable, but also sometimes a relief. And I think for me, especially finding this Wait Until 8th community, just makes it feel like you're part of a crew of people who are in it together, which is a nice feeling to have, that you're not going to be putting your kid through something that everyone else isn't going to suffer through, but you're making your child do it, that you have these other families you can talk to about whether it's challenging or not.
Do you have that group yet in Radnor?
So what we have started is a Facebook group for the main line. So you know that there's a national nonprofit that is Wait Until 8 that specifically asks or encourages parents to sign a pledge to wait until at least the end of 8th grade to give their kids a smartphone. And our mainline Wait Until 8th community is to be way broader than that for everybody who's interested in joining the conversation, because there are reasons that you might need or want to give a younger child a smartphone, even medical things or custodial, there are all kinds of reasons why it might be really hard to actually sign the pledge, but that doesn't make you less interested in thinking about it and having a place to talk about it and, share what's going on in your family with screen time, even if it's your own struggle, as it is for me around screen addiction. So I wanted to go to some of these questions that people are asking. And two of them are specifically really hoping for some numbers. Like, is it okay to give them 45 minutes of screen time after school? Or what about you? How much time did you allow screen time? At what ages? So what about if it's homework, or what if it's, what counts? What counts as just screen time? So that's sort of one sort of set of questions that people are wondering about. And then another one was addressing a little bit what we were talking about before, having to do with, well, if you don't give it, is it going to make them want it more? Like wanting this thing that they don't have.
So, how much screen time? I really differentiate between screen time for homework and screen time for socializing and screen time for scrolling by yourself on an app. I think that one of my kids in high school, I mean, this was older, but through Facebook groups, met people all over the world. And when we went to Israel, we were in this kind of remote place, and he bumped into people who he had met, and I kind of wondered whether these were real friendships. I allowed him the trust. I asked, there's open communication. He didn't tell me everything that he was doing on the computer, but I had enough communication to have a sense of what he was getting out of it. And but I was curious. He made plans with someone, and I was like, are they going to show up? Are these real friends? This was later high school, after maybe 2 years of being in some groups. And they were real friendships. I mean, that's the truth. They were real friendships, and they were learning from people where, like in his community, there weren't people that connected with him around certain topics. And this gave him a chance to connect. That's one example of like meaningful screens that, I don't care if he was socializing. When I was a kid, we would get home from school, do my homework, and then I would get on a landline phone with my girlfriends from school. And this was started in middle school. And I remember my dad used to tease me, but he didn't stop me, because I think he saw that it was a genuine socializing. He would say, like, you saw them all day in school. Like, what do you have to talk about? But like in school, it's very structured how you interact, and you have very little like social time really, and it's very in public. And you get to form these relationships. I talked with my friends. I'm still friends with a lot of the girls from my high school, middle school and high school today. So I think differentiating between what is going on with a screen makes a difference. I don't have, I don't have a hard rule, I'd say. I think it partly depends how the child is inclined. Like, there are educational games, there's reading, like where the dot moves. Like some kids, it's easier for them to read where the dot moves for each, or highlights as it goes. And for some kids with reading challenges, that's like super helpful. They're maybe not reading disabilities, but they really help them. I've had kids with ADD who had a hard time following like the volume of reading that they started getting in middle school. And they found that they could listen on 1.5. They would find it as a book. They were actually on YouTube, and they would listen to the book on 1.5, and it helped them follow along in the actual physical reading book. And then they could answer the questions and learn what are the metaphors, and who are the, what's the plot points, and, the story arc, and they could answer all these meaningful questions. So I mean, I think I do most of my work on a computer all day long. I think Sam does most of his work on a computer. So I don't think that screens per se is how they're being used. I worry most about asocial, non-social, or social, like social media, where it's not with anyone who's in a social group. I worry about that kind of excessive screen time for that a lot more than any other kind of screen time. So I think you have to monitor your kids to see and have conversations with them, and to kind of have a knowledge about how they're using them. I also don't believe that kids should be allowed to go to bed with their phones, because they do, people have phantom like vibrations. Adults too. So I don't think kids, I believe in having them plugged in the parents' room, or you can end up having the plugs in a locked place. Because some kids will sneak. So I just tell parents, like, don't fight with your kids, just lock them up. If that's your goal, is to not have them at night, put the cord through the door or whatever, lock them up. So that's a boundary that I think, that's one kind of boundary, and the other kind of boundary is how are they being used? I mean, I think I've treated girls that have eating disorders, or the budding eating disorders, and like starting in 5th, 6th grade, where they're really obsessed with like influencers on, whether it's, TikTok or Instagram or any of the media. And they're really obsessed with how people look, and they're comparing their real self with someone's fake external self. And it's really unhealthy, because kids at that age developmentally are figuring out who they are. And that's not a realistic yardstick for who they can be. So, and there's enough stories on the internet, that parents can access about, kids who are the influencers or who got addicted to influencers and how dangerous that can be. And also, you really have to watch out. Actually, Sam has a cousin who's a few years older than he is, who had a smartphone. I think she must have had a smartphone. She was like 13 or so. And one of her best friend's fathers was having sexual texts with her. And when the mom was monitoring her phone and saw them, and because her rule in a good way was that she had to have the password to the phone at that age. I think it was middle school age for this girl, their cousin. And she gave the phone to the FBI, and they caught the man, and he was arrested. And it was a really terrible, it was really hard for the mom to set this limit, because this was a pillar of the community that had, been sexually chatting with a child, and people were really against this mom. So it can be really hard to set the right limits for your kids, but these people exist and these problems exist, and it's really important, I think. I monitored my kids' phones and knew their passwords until about 10th or 11th grade, I'd say.
I think, I totally agree with what you said about the technology. It's important. We can use it for music. We can use it for, again, it's important to emphasize that this movement is not an anti-technology cult. And I also very much identified with what you said about the speed when you listen to an audiobook, because I can't even participate and listen to lectures live anymore because I get bored. I feel that people are speaking like this. My default is when I listen to a lecture is like, 2.5 speed. So, but anyway, a couple of questions that we have about research. So first of all, the second part of what Cora was asking, is there any research that shows that if you tell your child not to have a cell phone, he's like 15 years old or whatever, but everybody else in his class, does it make him feel or she feel more, wanting to get it, like desperately wanting to get it because she or he doesn't have it? And then the second question of Dave Rosenberg, who, by the way, is one of the leaders of this whole movement in the main line, and one of the first people to start gathering people. So thank you, Dave, and Yamil, his wife. What he's asking is that there seems to be, from literature, a difference in terms of smartphones and social medias affecting boys and girls in a different way, both negatively, but in different ways. Have you observed this? And are there any things that you have to say to the parents that is different for boys and girls? So these are a couple of questions.
You know what? I don't know so much of the literature. I just read a Pew study, in preparation for this. That was a exactly a year ago study. And there was some gender differences, but surprisingly not as much as I would think. They thought it was good for hobbies. 69% of teens, this were 13 to 17-year-olds, say smartphones make it easier to pursue hobbies and interests. 30% say it helps people their age learn good social skills. So even 70% of them know that it's not really helping them be social, but they may have other things out of it. 72% of teens say they often or sometimes feel peaceful when they don't have their smartphone. So only 44% say it makes them feel anxious when they don't have it. So I think kids are different. I think kids are different. I think some kids are more susceptible to, they're more conscious and more moved. They engage in more social comparison than other kids. I think in general, girls do more of that at that the middle school to younger age. Than boys. I also think girls are more into like clothing and makeup and dieting, and they're engaged in activities like, I'm not saying that large boys don't get teased, because they absolutely do. But it's, boys engage in like sports and gaming and things like that. Girls are often engaged in like dance and things like that are very bodycon. And I do think that they are more susceptible to like the kind of influencers, and there's data that show that. I don't happen to have it up. But I think boys get involved in gaming, and there is bullying. There's definitely bullying. They bully characters in some of the different kinds of games. I don't know if you have anything to add, Sam.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. I think what you're saying earlier about I think it starts to intersect with what you were saying earlier about types of screen time, and there's a big kind of gray area. I think in social media, which is kind of which is kind of where you get into these things where you see where some people are bullied, but it's also something in between kind of um, the more like decompression type addictions to phones, like gaming and scrolling on reels, compared to and on the other end, you might have like using a camera or texting with friends, things that we definitely don't, that we think are often good. And social media is kind of a big gray area because even more than when I was in school, but kind of my year was one of the first. People try to build like social media. A lot of kids try to build like social media, especially on Instagram, like followings in a little in middle school, but much more so in high school. And I think it's sometimes a bit of like a family value question, whether like how much that's something that you value for your child to create this kind of social network and kind of have lots of followers, because it's definitely something that's automatically reinforcing for people to try to create the best pictures and the best version of themselves for the world. And and it's something that can be very beneficial to some people because it can be a big part of how they learn about the broader world, because they see different people that they interact with on social media that can, I think this also intersects with some of Dave's questions about benefits. But at the same time, it can be harmful because, as I think we all know as adults, there's a lot of harmful like a lot of news perspectives on social media that we may not want our children to see too early or to fall into. There's also a lot of body shaming type stuff. If somebody has more followers or less followers, it becomes kind of a meaningless competition that can be very harmful and addicting. And so I think that that's today a bit of an elephant in the room, is how to deal with social media, because it's a little easier to say you set time limits on the kind of mindless scrolling and you allow the texting and you allow the texting and homework usage of screens. But then how you deal with social media is something that I'm not sure about, and I'm kind of interested what my mom would say about that as a psychologist.
I'm going to interject quickly before you reply, because just to add into that question, some of the people who are part of our community are people whose kids already have smartphones in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and may already have social media. So as we're thinking about this, can you also maybe talk a little bit about, like, if you're one of those parents, what is to be done now? I mean, we're not going to sit around and say, oh, I made the worst decision, I'm going to take it away. We're just going to move forward and figure out how we operate. Like, we have a smartphone now, the kid's young, they're on social media. Where are the boundaries at this point?
I think when kids are in elementary school, at least through 5th grade, probably 6th, that the goal is to have, I think you can limit which apps they're on and which apps they're not. I mean, you can have parental controls to not allow kids certain apps, and you can look at them on your own phone with those. And I think the way that you can deal with anything like it used to be on TV or the news, like how much of the news do you have kids watch and at what age? I think that's like a parent conversation and how much interest that parent has in the topic so they can have a meaningful, like what would be a meaningful family conversation about that topic. Some parents are really into politics and they're going to discuss politics really young. Some parents, the news is always on in the background, so a child is exposed to like all the fires that are going on in Philadelphia all the time, and the murders, because that's what's on the news, at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. So in some families that's going to be background noise. I think the same way as like my sister has 2 daughters, and they're about the same age as my boys. And, they made, all during COVID, they made TikTok videos together, all the dances and stuff like that. So it became like a fun thing, so they kind of joined it and they became part of it. But that also meant they could have conversations about how they could watch how their daughters were looking at the social media and kind of have conversations, because that could be on social media or it could be their friends in school, and it's going to be their, the teenage when they're older going to, more older high school parties and later in college. So it's an opportunity to talk about sort of body and how they dress and like, what kind of skimpy outfits were they going to put on for these dances. And it was a chance for my sister to say yes or no to something, knowing that they were going to plan to post it. So sometimes it's just an opportunity to have a conversation. I think when kids are younger, like elementary school age, and that's kind of whether it's wait until 6th or wait until 8th, and it can be wait until 6th for certain kinds of things and wait until 8th for maybe adding in the social media part of it. So, there are parental controls, so it doesn't have to be like an all or nothing thing. Did I answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was helpful.
So,
Thank you.
The question I do want to say, because I feel pretty strongly, I don't really think that reasonable limits, if you're really harsh and set limits about like 8 things that their peers aren't doing, so they're like different in 8 areas than most of their peers, that's going to make them feel really different and possibly resentful or left out. But I think simply not having a smartphone until you're in 8th grade, or simply, not being allowed to use TikTok, even though you have a cell phone in 5th grade, is not going to make you a social pariah. You can still see TikTok with a friend. A parent can choose to download it and familiarize themselves and see what they really think about it. Like I had to experience some things to decide how I felt and whether I wanted my kid to have it or not. So it's a lot of work for us as parents, honestly, to really be honest with ourselves. Like I was kind of saying about like heavy metal music, like it's not that I had some bad thing. I just had a negative vibe about it, but then when I got into it for real, and I still listen to it. So, sometimes we can be against something because we hear something about it, but like there's parts of TikTok that are really great. There's all these teachers that have great ideas. There's 2 aspects. There's a lot of good things on there as well as bad. And then there's also the issue of like the getting addicted to it and wasting time, like a time sink, like Sam was talking about. I can't believe we've gone this whole time and not talked about pornography. More than half of the internet use in general is pornography. And I have had many clients over the years, like significant because they're very difficult to deal with, but kids who are young, so they're in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and they have accessed, it's not just on a phone, but phones are easier to hide from parents. And they have accessed pornography and been very disturbed by it. And it to the point of being depressed and suicidal. As one example, a girl from a Catholic family, saw lesbian pornography, masturbated to it, got aroused and had an orgasm, and then felt like God hated her, like she was wrong. And these parents were not even anti-gay. But, you know, she was in a context and young enough that she didn't understand that there were people across, you know, her faith that, you know, could be accepting, and that just because she had an orgasm this once didn't mean that she was gay anyway. But she didn't have a context to talk about what she experienced. That's just one example. I have many examples of people experiencing, you know, violent pornography. I have, you know, young men and teenage men who think that like choking is like something that women like because that's like a thing in pornography. You know, and so there's a really good website called Scarlet Teen that kind of educates teens about like the parent, you know, about like how dangerous that is, even though it's very sex positive. So, you know, it's it is really important to know, have some sense of what your kids are accessing. And that's why young children having too free access is unmonitored is dangerous, because they can see things that are way bigger than they have the understanding to handle. And they don't really have the relationship with the parent, or they think they're bad because they know they're not supposed to look at it, and then they did. So it becomes a rift and they don't have anyone to talk to. Then they start acting, how they end up with me is because they're acting abnormally and the parent notices that. So, but it, you know, there are some really bad things that kids can access. So being aware of what your children are accessing and keeping those lines of communication open, I don't think there's any substitute for that, no matter what your rules are about phones.
This is fascinating. Honestly, we can continue talking for, I'm sure that Cora has a lot more questions. I have a lot of questions. There's questions from the audience that we didn't get to. But we're already after 9 o'clock. So before we part, I wanted to see if any of you, Beth, Cora, or Sam, have anything that you wanted to finish with. And one last thing that I wanted to say is Cora, in addition to all of this, she's very big in terms of in-person meetings. That's actually when I saw her a couple of weeks ago. It was one of the meetings that she arranged in a park nearby, and a lot of parents came. Kids were playing, and the parents were talking, and it was great. So I'm all for it. So any final comments, Beth, Cora, or Sam, or all of you?
I'll jump in quickly to say thank you. Thank you so much. This has been so interesting and helpful, and I'm really grateful that you've shared your time and your expertise with us.
Well, I'm happy to. It's all about balance, you know, get your kids outside, have family rituals, like dinner table conversation. Like there's other ways to build some of the things that we're afraid are taken away from by too much cell phone time. Like there's, you know, there's a lot of other things. And if those things are in balance, you know, one of my best friends, Donna, she raised her kids. They used to watch all kinds of trashy movies all weekend, but they all sat together and conversed about it. And their kids are all very successful, brilliant, you know, in their 30s now. And, you know, and I always used to tease her in a nice way about like how differently we were about TV and our kids, you know, and her kids are very intellectual and they're, you know, into their careers and they're not addicted to their phones or screens. You know, but they just had a different family culture than we had. And, you know, so I don't think there's one way to be. I just think there's a balance, and you have to think about like, are you teaching whatever you're doing across a week, a month, a year? Do you feel when you stand back every 6 months or so, do you feel like your family life is how you want it to look? And are the values that you really care, do you see your kids starting to show those values? Much less, you know, the phone is only one part of it. If you cultivate these other parts, they become just a piece of how you parent. So that's my last words.
Very good. Sam, any last words?
Just the phones are so addicting. And so I think I didn't answer this earlier, but I probably would not let a child of mine have one until at least middle school, maybe older. And I think if they wanted to have a social media in middle school, I might I think this was mentioned earlier, but I might let them have it like on my phone that they could interact in a very family engaged way. But I just think they're so addictive and it's dangerous. And I think we all see that for ourselves, but we see it even more in younger kids. So.
Well, thank you very much for all the insights, Sam and Beth and Cora. And this is the first of our webinar series. The recording is going to be available for those of you who want to share with other people or watch it. So that's it. Thank you very much. And we'll see you on the group, Facebook, on the WhatsApp, or in the in-person events that Cora and others are arranging. So good night, everybody.
Thank you all. Good night. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.